Good evening, Supervisor Finer, Town Council members, and everyone who is tuning in tonight. I'm Garrett Duquesne, Planning Commissioner for the Town of Greenburgh. I'm joined this evening by the town's consultant for the Four Corners and East Hartsdale Avenue Corridor Studies, AKRF, who in a few minutes will present traffic and stormwater and flooding mitigation information that they have been diligently working on. AKRF will discuss how these studies will assist the town in continuing to plan for various grants and assist the town in continuing to plan for potential redevelopment at Four Corners. I'd like to start by recapping several of the planning steps taken prior, which have brought us to this point. Following the town's adoption of the comprehensive plan in 2016, collectively, residents, the town board, and town staff worked together and identified the Four Corners area as a focal point and gateway intersection in the community, and re-envisioned what Four Corners could be through grassroots civic association and resident meetings and meetings with the town. In 2019, as a result of this visioning for Four Corners, the town board adopted what is known as the Four Corners Redevelopment Plan. This plan articulates the challenges that prevent the land uses at Four Corners from being cohesive and collectively successful, and highlights why the Central Avenue Mixed-Use Impact District regulations prevent significant private investment into the area. The plan describes what a redeveloped Four Corners could be, with appropriately scaled buildings, high-quality architectural components, attractive plaza and pocket park spaces, and blended structured parking. However, what we all recognize is that the towns cannot simply rezone the area and have what I just described put into place at Four Corners. What is needed is a professional, technical, and comprehensive review of the surrounding infrastructure system in the area. AKRF has, through the proactive support of the town, performed these analyses, which will be presented this evening. To assist the technical analysis, outreach and discussions occurred with New York State DOT, Westchester County, property owners in the area, the Hartsdale Public Parking District, the Hartsdale Fire District, and others. What I appreciate most about the land use steps that are underway for Four Corners and East Hartsdale Avenue is that we are not talking about planning in terms of all or nothing. Many of the traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and flood mitigation initiatives we will hear about tonight are very helpful and important, even if Four Corners is not redeveloped in the near future or ever. As examples, actions that are imminent, such as the Hawk signal at Central and Lawton, and video detection upgrades by New York State Department of Transportation at the intersection of Four Corners, will enhance safety and lessen traffic congestion and will improve quality of life this year, 2022, for residents. However, these same imminent mitigations are those identified by AKRF that can be made in the future are directly connected to the prospect of redevelopment at Four Corners, which could lead to transformational improvements to this gateway in Hartsdale and major investment in the town. From a stormwater flooding perspective, the concept is the exact same. AKRF studies identify mitigation steps that will be used and will lead to grant applications for projects that will be beneficial for the town with or without redevelopment. In terms of format this evening, AKRF will present and we will open up the floor to town board questions and comments, and then questions from the public. If you were viewing at home or otherwhere or some other place and you would like to ask a question, please email that question to publiccomment@greenburghny.com. We will respond live here tonight to as many questions as possible. Tonight, however, does not conclude the outreach that will occur with the public. Following the meeting, additional questions can be sent to planning@greenburghny.com. And there are several other planning steps that will involve public input and involve public hearings associated with Four Corners. If there is a civic association that would like me to meet with them at their monthly meeting to discuss Four Corners and East Hartsdale Avenue further, please let me know and I'd be happy to attend. You can reach out to me by email or direct at my phone line, 989-1532. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Elaine Dew and Michael Beatty of AKRF to begin with the Transportation in Four Corners presentation. Thank you.
Garrett, just a question. If the public emails planning@greenburghny.com or public comment@greenburghny.com, will you be able to see those both?
Yes, indeed. Both are fine.
All right.
Thank you, Garrett. Please let me know when you can see my screen and if it's in presentation mode.
All set.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'll be presenting the traffic and transportation portions of the Hartsdale Four Corners study. My name is Elaine Du, and I'm a technical director for AKRF. So in terms of what we'll go through today, we'll first discuss existing conditions, and that includes what's going on at Four Corners today in terms of the traffic and also pedestrian conditions. We'll talk through the planned improvements that New York State DOT and also the town of Greenburgh have planned for the Four Corners area. And finally, we'll discuss the Four Corners redevelopment potential with all of these improvements. And also a redevelopment, an initial and theoretical redevelopment scenario. So this is the study area we'll be reviewing and that we'll talk about tonight and that AKRF has reviewed for traffic. Our main study location is the Four Corners intersection of Hartsdale Avenue and Central Avenue. And the redevelopment parcels that we'll talk about are the northwest corner that's the former Dwayne Reed site, the northeast corner that has the Gyro restaurant and Unico, and also a Japanese supermarket, the southeast corner with IHOP and other restaurants and fitness equipment, and also the southwest corner from Dairydale all the way down to the Safavia furniture store. So the way we started this project was we did a lot of data collection and we collaborated extensively with the town. So we were out there ourselves in fall of 2019 to do observations and to also collect traffic data, pedestrian data at Four Corners. In January 2021, we did a site visit with the town of Greenburgh to do a site walk of the East Hartsdale corridor. And that involved walking down the corridor, observing various conditions, and talking through the different traffic signals on the corridor. We also looked through the Hartsdale Neighbors Association comments that were issued to the town. We coordinated it extensively with the Greenburgh Police Department, and through all of this, we identified various pedestrian and traffic deficiencies, which we'll discuss. So in order to do traffic analysis, we apply a software called Synchro 10. We use this as a standard traffic analysis software that applies a national standard called the Highway Capacity Manual. And that gives us, based on various inputs, including traffic volumes, pedestrian volumes, and signal timings, that gives us various outputs such as delay and level of service. So level of service is really a measure of how well an intersection operates. It's kind of like a school grade where A is the best and F is terrible. Level of service A is operating like free flow conditions. You'll generally arrive on green and pass through immediately. Clearly, we know that Four Corners does not operate this way today. Right now, Four Corners is operating closer to a level of service E, which is, it's when you'll experience some traffic backups. You'll experience cycle failure, which is when you'll wait at a traffic signal for a cycle or two to pass through the intersection. So we know it's not operating very well. The unique parts of this intersection is there are a lot of pedestrians crossing here. It's also subject to various Metro North peak hour surges with the trains coming in and the commuters coming through the intersection. And as a result, we do see various queues and a lot of delays at the intersection. So in the eastbound direction, that's West Hartsdale, that queue we've observed to extend past Washington Avenue and even to Hillcrest Road. In the westbound direction, which is East Hartsdale Avenue, we've noted that the queue can extend past Wilson Street and sometimes even to Columbia. And in the northbound direction, the northbound left turn queue actually spills back pretty far, and we've even seen it spill back to the BP gas station to the south. In addition to this, we've also looked at various safety at the intersection. So we analyzed the crash history at Four Corners. In doing that, we reviewed a 3-year period of crash data, which was 2016 through 2018. And during this time, 96 total crashes occurred at the intersection, which is equivalent to about 32 crashes a year. And out of all of these crashes, 31 injuries occurred, including 8 serious injuries. We noted that the crashes were primarily rear end and left turn crashes as well. And these are primarily attributed to things like delay. So one thing we noted was that the traffic conditions and the backups at Four Corners could potentially be leading to these safety deficiencies. So in that, the intersection crash rate was 9 times the statewide average of a similar intersection. And the left turn crash rate was actually 15 times the statewide average compared to, again, a similar intersection. So in terms of pedestrians, one thing we do have to note is that there is an exclusive pedestrian phase that pedestrians will actuate by pressing a button and then crossing. So an exclusive pedestrian phase is when all vehicles are stopped to allow pedestrians to cross any crosswalk. So it's especially during the peak hours, because there are so many pedestrians and so many commuters at the intersection, this exclusive pedestrian phase is activated for most of the peak hour. Some pedestrians will cross without the walk signal, which is something we observed when we were actually out there, but it varies truly. And this exclusive pedestrian phase does take up time from the intersection, and it may be, it's something that may be detracting from the traffic conditions. However, based on our conversations with the town as well as New York State DOT, we do not recommend removing this exclusive pedestrian phase, particularly because we want to maintain a level of pedestrian safety here. In addition, we also noted various conditions such as narrow sidewalks along East Hartsdale, which you'll see on the right-hand side. That is the north side of East Hartsdale. And although it's compliant with ADA, it's still narrow and not what we would want for a walkable, transit-oriented development. In terms of West Hartsdale Avenue, there is no sidewalk along the south side of Hartsdale Avenue, the south side of West Hartsdale Avenue. And beyond that, one thing we really wanted to consider was that in the fall and winter of 2019, this area of Greenburgh, as well as different various parts of the town, had experienced pedestrian crashes. So there were fatal pedestrian crashes at Lawton Avenue and Central Avenue intersection just north of our site, and also along East Hartsdale Avenue within our site. So we really wanted to keep that at the forefront of our minds when we were doing these analyses. For parking, there's parking in the Four Corners area. There's some on-street parking, but parking is primarily provided along surface lots. And this is for each business. Each business at this location, or almost each one, has their own parking lot. And I won't list all of these spaces. I'm sure you can read the slide, but there are a few hundred spaces at Four Corners. However, these spaces would not be able to support a level of growth that the town wants to see for Four Corners. In terms of access management is how various businesses and land uses will connect to major roadways. So that's really driveways leading to Central Avenue in this case. As you can see on the right-hand side, the orange marks indicate each driveway that exit from these Four Corners parcels to the existing roadway network. There are a lot of driveways, and I think this totals up to over 20 driveways for all these parcels. And even some sites, some businesses have multiple driveways for access to their site. So because there are so many driveways and so many driveways that are close to the intersection, vehicles will experience friction from these driveways that exit onto Central Ave and Hartsdale Avenue. And that can lead to safety deficiencies as well as traffic operational issues. So from this, we've talked through the traffic conditions and that we know Four Corners does not operate well today. We've talked through safety and that the traffic operations of Four Corners and various geometric deficiencies could potentially be contributing to safety issues at Four Corners. We've talked about pedestrian issues, parking and access management. From all this, we build into planned improvements. So these are what the town and also DOT want to do to improve Four Corners, even without development in the area. So Garrett had already mentioned, New York State DOT has various improvements planned for this area, which includes traffic signal upgrades. They're adding new detection, which will make the intersection operation more reliable. Whereas we understand that a few years ago, the West Hartsdale loop has failed in the past, which has led to backups and various traffic issues. So with detection upgrades, this is less likely to happen. There are also signage improvements for the intersection, which will make it easier for drivers to pass through. There are also various pedestrian improvements, such as curb extensions and ramp improvements that will better allow pedestrians to travel to and from Four Corners. And in addition, New York State DOT is planning to relocate the northbound Beeline bus to the far side of Central Avenue. So if you see my mouse, the bus stop currently is right here, and New York State DOT plans to relocate it north to here. In addition to what DOT has planned, the town of Greenburgh also has, as Garrett mentioned earlier, a hawk signal planned for Lawton Avenue. And a hawk signal is a pedestrian, also known as a pedestrian hybrid beacon. This is a traffic signal that's really just for pedestrians. So a pedestrian would push a push button, it would change from green to red and stop all traffic for people to cross. And this would really improve pedestrian safety for this area. Additionally, the town of Greenburgh has submitted a TAP grant application to New York State DOT for adaptive traffic control system and also camera detection along East Hartsdale Avenue plus Four Corners, as well as various pedestrian improvements for West Hartsdale Avenue and East Hartsdale Avenue. For adaptive traffic controls, this is really how we say smart signals. These are smarter traffic signals that adapt to real-time traffic, and they'll shift time and they'll better serve traffic along East Hartsdale Avenue as well as at Four Corners. So in addition to what's already been planned, we looked at various additional improvements that we can build on to further unlock development potential at Four Corners. And our main idea was adding turn lanes at the intersection. So in this case, we'd be adding pocket turn lanes. We've looked at pocket turn lanes along Central Avenue and along West Hartsdale Avenue. So as you can see here in the southbound direction, this yellow arrow, this turn pocket would be within the Central Park Avenue parking lane. And this would allow vehicles to better travel southbound. It would improve southbound traffic conditions. In the northbound direction, this little arrow here, this turn pocket again would improve northbound traffic conditions and is located in the bus stop currently that New York State DOT is proposing to move from this side of the street to this side. For West Hartsdale Avenue, this is something that a developer would need to include as part of their development of this parcel here, the Dairydale parcel. But adding an eastbound right turn lane from West Hartsdale Avenue to Central Avenue would really allow vehicles to travel better along West Hartsdale Avenue, which does back up very far today.
Yes.
Can
You just define what a pocket turn lane is?
Oh, sure, of course. A pocket turn lane is not a full lane. It's a short, approximately 50 to maybe 200-foot lane that vehicles can turn off the main travel lanes into in order to take them off of the main lanes and give them their own exclusive lane to turn. Does that make sense? Do you want me to explain it further?
Absolutely makes sense. Thank you.
Great, of course.
Require state legislation. This would require.
Sorry, was there another question?
Require state legislation. I mean, the state would have to approve it since Central Avenue and West Hartsdale Avenue are state roads.
The state has to approve all of them.
They would have to approve all of them, and we've had initial conversations with New York State DOT in which they're generally supportive of all of these improvements. Garrett, am I representing that correctly? Garrett, can you hear
Yes,
me?
thank you. I was on mute there. Yes,
Okay.
we have had numerous meetings with New York State and informed them of this study and some of the land use planning that we've done. And yes, indeed, New York State has been very supportive. And I would just add, I think that it's significant to note that when New York State DOT was initially planning to make those improvements that Elaine had on the screen a few moments ago, they did not include a light detection system. I believe they included updated loops and a timer signal. And we were able to meet with DOT at the time prior to meeting with the town board in September of last year. And AKRF, on behalf of the town, presented the ATCS study that they performed for the town and really showed the benefits of what that system would do for the corridor. And that actually had the DOT shift their plans. That they liked the new numbers and the efficiency that the system would really have us gain. And DOT actually switched to a detection light system sort of mid-process, working with their procurement process. So that was actually a very positive step that occurred midstream, if you will. But yes, that's the update there with DOT.
Yeah, and that camera detector that DOT is now proposing as a result of our collaboration with them will really help facilitate the implementation of ATCS or smart signals at this intersection. Great. To continue on, an additional turn pocket we consider.
Follow-up question. If the state, Garrett, is already receptive to doing this, is this something that that say within the next year or so, there's a good chance that it's going to get done, or are there additional action steps that the town has to take since they're already receptive?
Yeah, so the steps that the state will take, and this project is projected by the state to occur over the course of this summer, are ADA compliant ramps at all four of the intersections, the new light signals, the detection system. The turn lanes are not part of the state programmed improvements. And in my opinion, those turn lanes become much more viable when a private developer, and we'll hear more about the process, but when a private developer seeks to build consistent with the town's Four Corners redevelopment plan, because now what you have is that private developer making those turn pockets at zero expense to the town. But having said that, yes, we do have an active TAP grant application, of which, super fingers crossed, we've yet to hear, but if we do hear positive on that, that will give the town the funding to place a sidewalk from Four Corners up West Hartsdale for a duration of about a mile, in addition to traffic calming, traffic pedestrian safety improvements on East Hartsdale and full ATCS. So I can't stress enough how important this grant application is. If we don't get it, it's not the end of the world. We will, we will figure out other sources. Yeah, there's all sorts of opportunities that are before us, and that will really give rise with the Four Corners redevelopment concept.
Maybe we should send them a copy of this presentation so they could see how serious we are about making some of the safety improvements and addressing the whole four corner, area, because I think that this would probably impress them.
Right.
You
I
know,
don't disagree.
Could I suggest we hear the presentation, because a lot of people are watching this, and if we're going to send this presentation to the state or anybody else, it would be helpful to get it all on the record tonight.
Yeah, and it looks like there are federal funding opportunities that might be applicable as well. Megan had sent out the email.
So just to add on to what Garrett had said, yes, these turn pocket lane improvements would be tied to each development. And one of the thoughts we had together was tying in each turn pocket to each of these corners. So for instance, the West Hartsdale Avenue turn pocket would be tied to the Darrydale corner redevelopment. The southbound Central Park Ave turn pocket would be tied to Dwayne Reed, and so on. Another idea we had in mind was adding a turn pocket on East Hartsdale Avenue, which is not feasible today as there is development up to here. So in that case, the redevelopment would be able to provide this opportunity. However, we're not certain if a developer would have the taste to do this. So to be conservative, we didn't include this turn pocket, the westbound turn pocket from East Hartsdale Avenue, in our analysis. So that was really just to be conservative and to model what is possible to happen. So in order to examine the redevelopment potential, again, going through the process from the beginning, we collected a lot of data. We collaborated extensively with the town and various stakeholders. And from there, we reviewed existing conditions for traffic, for pedestrians, for parking, access management. We looked at what's happening at Four Corners in the background, as well as what we could do to improve traffic so that development could occur here. And from there, we developed this initial development scenario, which was, we won't present this today, but it was a maximum possible development that is in line with the zoning code. And from there, we ran several iterations. We did various scenarios. We ran analysis for various scenarios. And we really got to a point where we developed this final theoretical development scenario. I don't want to call it final because, again, a developer could come in and change things. However, this is a theoretical development scenario in which it is an acceptable level of development to the town while still maintaining traffic conditions that are comparable and better to what's happening out there today. So from there, the theoretical development scenario includes approximately 450 dwelling units through all of these parcels and approximately 60,000 square feet of commercial, retail, restaurant, and office space. And this is through all of these corners. And we split up, for instance, the south corners, which are pretty large. We split each of these up into two parcels, whereas the north corners we kept as one each. So that's what you'll see going forward. I'll refer to them as Northwest, Northeast, Southwest 1, Southwest 2, Southeast 1, and Southeast 2. So this is just to show you what our theoretical development scenario is in terms of how much development there is. And again, just to summarize, it's approximately 450 residential units, 60,000 square feet of commercial, retail, office space. And this would equate to approximately 4 stories. We took this development scenario, we estimated how many trips could be generated through this redevelopment, and we added it to our traffic network. And from this, we were able to get results. These results include, again, the improvements that we discussed before, the turn pockets, the adaptive traffic control signal system, and all these improvements. So as you can see, on the left-hand side here are the existing conditions that we discussed before, where everything is operating at a level of service E, which is not great. However, with the theoretical development scenario and all of these improvements, we were able to experience some level of improvement at the intersection. So as you can see, we're operating at a level of service D in the AM peak hour, which is acceptable for downtown locations, for central business district locations. And in the PM peak hour, although we still operate at level of service E, it's better than what we had, what's out there today. In terms of parking, we understand that in order to better serve what's going to be out there in Four Corners, there needs to be more parking in order to support all of the residential development, all of the commercial development. So based on parking requirements that are supportive of transit-oriented developments, we were able to develop a general parking requirement for each of these corners. It totals to approximately 900 spaces. And what we envision is multi-level parking garages that are consolidated for each corner. And these parking garages would not be viewable from street level like most downtown areas. Instead, they would be screened. So you would have commercial and residential space, likely more commercial space around these parking garages. So you access them from the back, and out front where you walk on the sidewalk, all you see are the stores. The other idea we had was we need to maintain and potentially expand the Hartsdale Site C parking lot that is under the Hartsdale parking district. That's really to better serve all the residents and commuters of this area. Additionally, 900 parking spaces is a lot. So some other items that the town could consider are allowing various credits to reduce the parking requirements, such as shared parking credits and lowered requirements for various land uses.
I just had a question about the parking. If you could just go back where it says maintain and expand Hartsdale Site C parking lot. Are you talking about possibly also creating like a mixed use development for the parking district to say sell the lot and have both parking and mixed use, or just parking?
In general, the way that I think it's best to think about the Hartsdale Public Parking District Site C down there is to simply treat it as a potential opportunity. So if there's a scenario where the existing property owners are able to work with an architect and an engineer and present a concept that expands the parking for Hartsdale Site C, I think it's premature to indicate whether it would make sense for that site to be sold, or perhaps there could be a scenario where a multi-level parking site is developed and then transferred over to the parking district. I think there's a variety of ways it could occur and could occur successfully. But I think at this early stage, on a sheer development level, when you look at the square footage of space and the acreage from an aerial photo sense, it's readily apparent that when you combine those two lots, you have quite a bit more flexibility to have rear parking lanes and more area for a parking district. So when we met with the parking district, I described it in just this fashion, and to really just really see if, as we continue to plan, a private developer can work with the parking district in a public-private partnership fashion, and really see what the possibilities are with, combining or not combining those lots.
I did want to note that we do, in other municipalities that we've worked with, in which developers buy public lots, we've seen them also have contracts to give a certain number of parking spaces back to the municipality. So there are options, and like Garrett said, there are different possibilities to see what the developers envision. So in addition to new parking lots to better support Four Corners, we also envision improving, consolidating the 20+ driveways down to only a couple of driveways. This really helps with just reducing that traffic friction along Central Avenue and along Hartsdale Avenue. And this was an idea that New York State DOT was highly supportive of. So turning 10 driveways into one driveway helps traffic a lot. And we envision this to be shared for the entire lot. As you can see here, a single shared driveway for these two development parcels. This would be most conducive to improving traffic for Four Corners. So these driveways would be a combination of both full access driveways, which allow both left and right turns, or right in, right out driveways, which DOT is pushing more for in terms of private development. And finally, we understand that there's a very strong need for safety and pedestrian improvements in the area. And a few things that we suggest are various signal improvements like reflectorized backplates for all traffic signal heads. And those are, I'm sure you've seen these when driving around, whereas this is kind of a naked traffic signal. A reflectorized backplate is like a yellow plate on the back so you can see it outlines the traffic signal. And it really highlights the signal for drivers to alert them better to the signal that's there. Another idea is having lane line extensions, which are the dashed lines in the middle of an intersection to show vehicles where they need to go. And it really delineates space for particularly left turning vehicles. And we've heard all the complaints from the Hartsdale Neighbors Association. Roadway lighting improvements are needed along East Hartsdale Avenue for vehicles. And in order to improve pedestrian conditions, buildings at Four Corners, the proposed redevelopment, setbacks should be pushed back in order to provide wider sidewalks for pedestrians. 5 foot wide should be the bare minimum, but 8 foot wide plus is really what we need for a better, more walkable area that is conducive to transit-oriented development. And this could really help Four Corners to be what it could be for the town. And at this point, I don't believe we're taking questions, but I think I'm passing it on to Garrett. Passing it on to Justin, right, Garrett?
What I think might make sense is to turn it over to the town board for questions before we get to the stormwater component of the presentation, if there are any questions. I haven't received any questions via email from residents to date.
So all these recommendations, most of them you would recommend that we wait until it's redeveloped, and how many could be done before there's a redevelopment proposal?
Yeah, that's the main thought, that these various developments could be tied into improvement to the redevelopment in the area. So like I mentioned before, each corner would be responsible for their own set of improvements, but I'm sure Garrett could elaborate further.
Yes, so the types of improvements that really are challenging to make now are things like driveway consolidations. There's really minimal scenario where a driveway consolidation can happen at present. I do believe the turn lanes, I don't see the motivation of a private property owner to make them at this time. So I think the types of updates that we're going to really press for are the pedestrian updates, such as sidewalks up West Hartsdale Avenue, lighting East Hartsdale Avenue, pedestrian improvements East Hartsdale Avenue, adaptive traffic control systems East Hartsdale Avenue. But in terms of next steps, what we can do is take this report and really, as a municipality, start to think about the type of zoning that would enable the types of densities that were just described. That's really the next step. The CA district in no way, shape, or form would enable this type of mixed-use development. In fact, the CA district does not allow residential over commercial or residential over non-residential. So just purely on a use basis, you have a district that does not work. But the key to this whole equation is really the town working with the public process, working with, civic association leaders, getting that, buy-in on following through what we did with the Four Corners redevelopment plan, ensuring residents that this is not, New Rochelle or White Plains. We're not looking to bring in 9, 10-story buildings, but really buildings that are appropriate for the town of Greenburgh. And when you set the zoning regulations to meet what your goals are for the town, there's really no curveballs. The development community likes that surety. They know what their obligations are to enhance the area, and they know, the scale and types of developments that the town seeks. So that's really kind of the next steps, to start thinking about rezoning strategies.
In terms of, I think in your presentation, you said that there could be about 450 units of, housing. Do you feel with an area that's so, congested right now, that that the area could handle, 450 or even 250 multifamily units, assuming, these recommendations are made?
Yeah,
Of
so
course.
sorry, go ahead, Elaine.
That's what our analysis showed, that with 450 units plus all of those improvements to traffic signals, to turn lanes, we do see better operations than what is out there today. So we do believe that 450 is feasible. And we even tested scenarios that are even more. We tested, I don't want to say the numbers, but we tested more than 450. And although those are still feasible, we don't see those traffic improvements. So we understand that the town wants to not only build it at Four Corners, but also improve traffic and improve traffic conditions for people traveling through the intersection and for the town. So this level of development really helps to unlock that traffic potential.
Well, in the chart that you showed, it showed that, there could be some improvements at certain times of days, but it seemed like the build out, except in one situation that was notable, maintains the same or not too dissimilar level of service. With all these improvements, I'm not so sure the residents are looking for having similar levels of service, but, so we'll do all of these changes, we'll make it improved, we'll put in more units, and you'll have the same level of service. But, fortunately, because of the improvements, we'll have more units. Was there an analysis done to see, with maybe not so many units, whether or not we could actually get from a D or an E to a B? Or was the goal to maintain somewhat the same level of service, but see how many more units we can get in with the improvements that you're making?
So typically speaking, level of service B is more appropriate for rural areas, for areas that don't experience as much traffic. So for a major commercial corridor, for a downtown area that has a lot of development and pedestrian activity, level of service D is where I would say our sweet spot, in which vehicles don't experience a lot of delay, but at the same time, we know we're processing a lot of traffic. So we like to see a level of service D. And in terms of the, and we do see a level of service D in the PM peak hour based on our analysis. In terms of the PM peak hour, we do note that it still operates at level of service E, but slightly better. However, we do want to note that the way we analyzed the scenario with the adaptive traffic control system, in actuality, the adaptive traffic control system may operate better than what we analyzed. So our analysis software is somewhat conservative, but the way that the smart signals would process traffic, the actual conditions could be better. Mike, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple other items. One thing to note is just for this intersection itself, there really isn't a scenario where you can improve this to that level of service B because of the nature of the signal itself. Elaine talked about earlier about the all ped phase. Very important to have that for pedestrian safety. But if you're thinking about traffic moving, no traffic moves during that time. So it'd be almost impossible to get a better level of service because of that pedestrian safety element. There are elements that also we can't capture in a model. For instance, Elaine talked about the access management. That has a big effect on corridor travel times. People slowing down to go into a driveway, people coming up from multiple driveways. Consolidating those may not show up in level of service, shows up in the real world. And lastly, even though the level of service is similar to what's out there today, what you're not getting is the pedestrian improvements to sidewalks. We showed the picture of East Hartsdale with the sidewalk that's maybe 3 feet wide. Without redevelopment, that sidewalk cannot be wider than that. So it's true the level of service is similar, which shows that we could take on this additional these units and not really degrade the system to failure. But you know, there's elements of the signal itself that really prohibit it to being a level of service B or C because of that PED phase. And that in discussion with DOT, not that we wouldn't even recommend it, even if we did, DOT would probably shoot us down pretty quickly. It is really hard to get rid of an all PED phase. So I just wanted to add those other information.
Of the 450 units, are they envisioned to be newly built condos?
They would be multifamily buildings, could be rental, they could be for sale. You know, typically that is a function of what the market makes most sense for the market. In all instances, there would be a 10% affordable housing component to that.
Of the two you mentioned, that you didn't include condos, because it could be market rate, condos, or rentals. Is that the three possibilities?
I guess it could be condo, co-op, or rental.
Or co-op? All right.
Yeah.
All right. It just, it would seem that, I think in the comprehensive plan, we were talking about 50 units per corner. This is now at 450 units for the four corners. It just seems logical that if you had half the number of units, you would have half the number of vehicles adding to the wait times at the lights. But what I'm hearing you say is that it's inherent in the corner itself that that's not the case, and the D level of service is the objective. Is that what I'm hearing?
One important thing to
Correct.
note.
And, yeah. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Elaine.
One important thing to note is that although it is logical that less development equals less traffic, a lot of it is background traffic that's traveling through Four Corners. So a lot of the people traveling through Four Corners aren't going to destinations there. They're going through down to Yonkers or up to White Plains. But it's a function of the background traffic, and we really need to look at it. We looked into the background traffic. We did the traffic counts. So
Let me follow up to your question. So right now, this is rated, you said a D?
yes, that's correct.
And if we do the traffic improvements that you're recommending, and you add the 450, we'll be in better shape than we are now. But let's assume we went, so let's say instead of a D, it would be a C plus, or whatever, or a C minus. If we basically
It's not
made
college.
it
doesn't
made it
work
like
that way.
250 units rather than 450, would then there'd be less traffic? And then is it possible that if Francis Sheehan's, if your argument is correct, that it could be a B, or, I mean.
I don't know if it's a B, but it would make sense that
Yeah.
it wouldn't be as bad as it would be if you had twice the development, because all of the people coming out of the units on those corners are going to want to come into the intersection that all the rest of the neighbors, coming down the hill, from Hartsdale going to the train station, they have to make it through the gauntlet of all the, no matter how few driveways you have. And of course, I don't know whether or not the fewer the driveways, the longer is the backup on those driveways to get out actually onto East Hartsdale Avenue. So we'd have to sell that. I was just curious when I saw the chart as to the levels of service.
Another thing that, just as a follow-up, I think to make the Four Corner redevelopment a reality, there's a point where people are going to be really nervous with all the traffic. So if you say 450 units, initially, people may be so
I think you are
scared
seeing
that
it,
it's
yeah.
not going to get to the next level. On the other hand, if we come in with smaller numbers initially, I think that there may be more openness from the community and people might be more willing to accept it.
Well, there are a couple of factors too. If we are promoting transit-oriented development, then you'll have people walking to the train station,
That's true.
right? So it's not like some one or two people of each of the 450 units are going to come out at the same time, get into their car, especially, if mores have changed in terms of work, if people are not working 5 days a week, 9 to 5. So there are any number of factors, and I'm assuming that you looked into that in your calculations, because it sounds like you were pretty thorough.
Yes.
But it sounds like you took worst case scenario, and still with the timed lighting that adjusts, and with the improved other traffic patterns, the lighting patterns along Hartsdale Avenue that we're considering, that their studies are showing at only specific periods of time, right? Rush hour, at the height of what, can you define that, when the worst traffic would be, the hours?
Sure, it's just the worst commuter peak hours between, I believe it was 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning, and in the afternoon it was 5:30 to 6:30, if I'm not mistaken, but just the main peak hour of commuter traffic. And I do want to note that, yes, we were conservative in our analysis, and because it is a transit-oriented development, we would anticipate more people to be walking to and from Hartsdale, the Hartsdale train station. However, we took only we assumed only 10% of people would be doing that. And that is a very conservative value. And in most transit-oriented developments, we would see a number much higher than that, closer to 20, 30, 40%. Also, Supervisor Feiner, I just want to backtrack very slightly and talk a little bit about existing conditions. I wanted to correct myself in that in the AM peak hour and PM peak hour, right now, everything operates at level of service E. With development, with the improvements in the AM, we're operating at a level of service D, and in PM, we're operating at level of service E. However, when we did also run a scenario where there's no development, no improvements, and we do see a similar level of service D. So that indicates to us that a lot of the traffic delays are due to background traffic and not what's going on specifically at Four Corners. But Mike, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you pretty nailed it. It's less development, definitely be less trips. However, I don't want there to be perception that if you reduce it by 50%, that's a linear one-to-one ratio of what happens with the delay. There's a lot of traffic that's not associated with the Four Corners that comes through here. So I agree, less units, definitely less traffic. I don't want there just to be a perception that now we're level service B. Even if we do 200 units, we're probably still in that DE range, given what's going on with the background traffic. And then just to follow up on Lane's point with the reductions, the 10%, a lot of times we don't go higher than 10% because state DOT, it's their roadway, they have their limits of what they accept. So Lane's right. In reality, we could see more than 10%. We capped it there, meet their guidelines.
I just want to point out that East Hartsdale Avenue and the large buildings that are on there it was before its time because it was transit-oriented development prior to that term actually even existing, I believe. And that's why many of the buildings were built with minimal or no parking whatsoever. Right? And now we're faced with, during the winter time, people don't have any place to park their cars because they need to get them off the street. And they have not only one car, but some have two cars or more. And so we also have to be mindful of that. So I know that they're at the beginning of a process, and you've done, excellent work. And I know you've been working hard at this. And I've been out at some of the site visits, and I see how thorough you are. And of course, whenever anybody throws out, large numbers, somebody's going to raise a question about something. So it's a very good beginning of the process, but none of this goes anywhere unless we could address stormwater. So that's a great segue to stormwater.
Yeah, I just want to ask one other thing. Like I'm a little concerned that people are going to look at the 450 number and get all freaked out. We could also market this and say, okay, we're going to try, say, 50 units at one corner and see the impact of the. I'm wondering
Well,
if there's.
that might be how it happens. The development's not going to all happen at once.
Right.
And I think that this is the study that gives us parameters. We've got time to plan it.
Right,
We don't.
Yeah, I wanted to stress that the town board, ultimately has the ultimate control here. So if it's, let's say, a downtown mixed-use development overlay district, that is the zoning mechanism that enables mixed-use redevelopment at Four Corners, the town board can set the either the FAR or the unit density per acre. And if it's such that the town board feels only confident with, let's just say, 50, 60 units at a corner, then you have that control to set that parameter. And if the development community responds to that, then then you have a scenario where you're going to see proposed redevelopment. If the development community deems that to be not of value for reasonable return, then you will not have developers come up and take advantage of the overlay district. So I just want to stress the town board does have the control, and these are numbers that through the study have indicated would work per the expertise of AKRF and in how they feel New York State DOT would view the intersection. But really, it is a starting point, and I think it's very helpful.
Garrett, I just had one other question. Do we have the ability of, when we're saying we're rezoning, say, the entire Four Corners, could we take like a corner of the Four Corners and say, okay, we want to test out, say, the east side, one corner, and see the impact, and then decide whether we're going to, allow maximum, say, development at the other three corners? Because I'd feel more comfortable if we try, before you give the right to develop all Four Corners, that we test out one, see if it works, see what the problems are, and then
Paul, I think this is a master plan, and
no, I'm just asking.
you
I'm asking
Yeah.
a question if we have any opportunity to just take a
Town
section.
board could do nothing, or they can do one corner, they can do four.
No, do we have the ability of saying we are only right now going to do one corner?
It all depends on
half a loaf.
you would. I mean, if the zoning mechanism is, let's say, as I described, a mixed-use downtown redevelopment overlay district, the town board would have the discretion to place that overlay district on 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those
Okay.
corners. So if the town board felt it prudent to enact that or remap the overlay onto one corner, the town board has the discretion to do that.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Stormwater?
Stormwater.
And I do want to note that there have been some questions that have come in.
Oh,
Does the board think that it makes the most sense to go through the stormwater to make sure that we have time for all that? Or would you like me to touch on?
Are they on the non-stormwater? Are they on this?
These are traffic questions, yes.
I think we should do it because we promised them that we would take their questions during the meeting.
Okay, very good. So I will touch on some of the questions. So first question, developers are being asked to fund a sidewalk all the way up West Hartsdale Avenue. There are massive expenses included to pay for stormwater management associated with that. Is it realistic that the town relies on a developer to fund such a massive endeavor? So what AKRF presented were a series of improvements such as turn lanes, driveway consolidations, better sidewalks along the frontage of the site. We did not present that a developer would be required to place a sidewalk all the way up West Hartsdale Avenue. The sidewalk up West Hartsdale Avenue is something that the town endeavors to build via an active grant, which we have yet to hear from. So hopefully we get that grant. If the grant does not come through, yes, the town will have to pivot and figure out other ways to improve pedestrian safety up West Hartsdale Avenue. Could that include, the developer help perhaps, but probably more confined to the four corners. What is the town willing to offer a developer to give some of their property to become a turning lane or to become a pocket park? Will the town offer an extra floor in the eventual development? Well, ultimately, the offer is the potential, the prospect for updated zoning to enable something much different than what the current zoning allows. So that is a big time incentive. So I think that's how I would respond to that one. Questions have come in. Have you looked at financial scenarios that justify 4 stories and not more? Our calculations show that a minimum of 5 stories is needed to make financial sense for a development to be profitable, which was several years ago. So ultimately, I think we're talking, and when we think about stories, that's an urban design and a aesthetic type consideration. So we'd want to be respectful of adjacent properties. I think the bigger driver is the unit count. So, we say 4 stories. Could there be a 5th recessed story, perhaps, if it was done so in a manner that is consistent with neighboring sites and respectful of neighboring sites? I do see a flooding question. We'll check back on that. The traffic study needs to be redone post-COVID years and beyond its current borders. It's 4C now, years later, fully defined to its boundaries, if not why. Stop coasting upon pedestrian safety as camouflage for things that will get worse. Let me start with AKRF. What is your opinion on much of the traffic data which was taken 2019 pre-pandemic? Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, our traffic data was collected in October 2019. So yes, pre-pandemic and representative of existing conditions. One thing I do want to note is that traffic levels today have not yet returned to pre-pandemic conditions. We're close, but not quite during peak hours, especially, which is where we focused our analysis. So in that, our analysis was conservative in using pre-pandemic data. And also, Garrett, maybe this is overstepping slightly, but each developer would be responsible for their own site-specific traffic impact studies using newly collected traffic data or even historical data that's been grown for each of their sites. So this is not the end-all be-all, like you've mentioned previously, but there will be more studies done for Four Corners.
Thank you. Another question: in calculating the traffic due to potential new development, did you factor in the need for school buses to stop and pick up and drop off students residing in the new housing units?
So in terms of school bus drop-offs and pickups, these would really be fewer vehicles at the site, if you think about it, because all students go into one single school bus as opposed to being picked up by a parent driven to school in one vehicle. The software that we use to analyze traffic does not consider school bus drop-off and pickup. However, it is still a conservative analysis, and I'll ask Mike to elaborate on that if there's anything more to be added.
No, I think you captured it. It does account for regular buses that pull over and stop, like the B-Line buses, but not really school buses. They happen so frequently that they don't really account for the changes over an hour. So you typically don't see them in a traffic study.
Another question, who would finance the parking garages? The town is not the developer. That's a good comment. And yeah, so that's where you do start to think about return on investment. And when you think about parking spaces and structured parking being upwards of, could be $40,000, $50,000 a space, you think about land acquisition costs. I think on some level, you do want to be cognizant of not setting the density bar too low, where it's, just flat out unrealistic for anything to happen. But, I just want to call attention to like another development in the town of Greenburgh, which we all know, the West Hab, for example. So that site, it is a small site. I believe it's under a half acre, 28 units, and they were able to do parking under the building and then some surface parking. So, the finances for that project worked out along with that acreage. But so there could be a combination of underground parking, surface parking, and yes, it all is a function of the density and having adequate parking. But indeed, structured parking is not inexpensive. Point well taken. DOT has not backed turn lanes. They'll only go along with the less costly pedestrian safety issues. So, AQRF, could you comment on your experience with private proposals or proposals to add turn lanes for the purposes of enabling better traffic efficiency?
Yeah, of course. When we did meet with DOT, they were supportive of these turn lanes. And they did support the idea of adding turn lanes at all the locations we had suggested. And in terms of developers being tied to turn lanes, what I wanted to mention before was that turn lanes could potentially be a required mitigation for developers to implement for each of their sites. So in the past, we have seen developers implement these site-specific mitigations, including turn lanes and other roadway improvements. So I don't believe this is something the town would be responsible for, or DOT for that matter. The developer would be responsible for paying for this.
One or two more, then I think we should transition to stormwater. So another good question, when you build an apartment building or apartment buildings at the Four Corners, and you have calls for ambulance and fire trucks, 2 fire trucks show up at those buildings, you will shut down Central Avenue and East or West Hartsdale Avenue for at least 20 minutes, which could happen on a regular basis. So yeah, great consideration. And the site development, the site design for any building will absolutely have to have off-street emergency lanes. These sites have to have loading, unloading, so that there's so many factors that go into what has to occur within the private development, and that's where structured parking really allows you to compact your development and really make best use of the site. So because there's a lot of inputs, it's not just buildings and driveways and loading areas. It's things like landscaping and buffers to be respectful of adjacent areas. So point well taken. Yet could there be scenarios where an emergency vehicle needs to be out in front of the building? Absolutely, cannot rule that out. But with good design, I think that would not be the norm. There was also a comment. Sorry, go ahead.
In doing the comprehensive plan, we were looking at the potential for a total redo of the corners. And as part of one of those total redos, which is what they're considering here, Hartsdale Fire Department would come out of the firehouse and go straight across, and that would be a lane to get around the Four Corners area. So if the Four Corners area was blocked, they would still have access to the buildings on East Hartsdale Avenue. These are all things that have to get worked out in the planning process for a comprehensive plan for those corners. So those kind of discussions have been had, and they're very good ones. And I would hope that it doesn't happen frequently on East Hartsdale Avenue, that the fire trucks are there and responding and tying up traffic. And but those are things that have to be addressed.
Yes, and I mean, if everything lines up and there's zoning that puts out, a density that the board is comfortable with and respectful of neighboring properties and meets acceptable traffic levels, if all those things line up, you're really talking about, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have, an engineer and an architect team that really can think intensely about that site and design it in a way that, really speaks to what the Four Corners redevelopment talks about. Attractive buildings that, make sense and are in the context of the corner that they're on. So I just think the professional architect engineer, has a lot of work to do in this equation, but, I think these are design considerations that can be met. And I feel like, we're just setting forth a path where we're enabling that possibility. Okay, so it's about 8:30. What I'd recommend is that we turn it over to Justin Sini to walk us through a lot of the stormwater and flooding mitigation considerations that we should be thinking about.
Great. Thanks, Garrett. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So good evening. My name is Justin Sini. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a vice president here with AKRF. We've been working with Garrett and the entire town staff for quite a while now in identifying the existing conditions at Four Corners and really the greater watershed and identifying measures to kind of help relieve issues of frequent flooding and also with an eye towards how to mitigate kind of the larger events. So just a quick overview about what we'll discuss in our presentation, and I will try my best to be brief because I know we are tight on time, and we definitely want to save time for questions. So we're going to do a quick overview of what existing conditions are like here at Four Corners, what's kind of driving a lot of the drainage issues that are occurring under existing conditions, talk about some options that are kind of near term, if you will, or kind of interim steps that can be employed to provide relief. The event that we've chosen as the analysis point for that is 2-year storm. We can talk more about how we got there a little later in the presentation. Talk about the 100-year storm mitigation option, which I think in light of Ida is a much more kind of top of mind event for folks in the community and in the town. And then as well, talk about some kind of near-term strategies or kind of said more plainly, some low-hanging fruit that might be able to be implemented in the interim of either of these types of options that can provide real benefits to property owners in terms of damage experienced during some of these storm events. So we'll just start with a kind of a high-level overview of what's called Hartsdale Brook, and I think most folks would say that they probably haven't seen a brook running through this area, which is just true. And we'll show a little bit of how we got there in a minute. But Four Corners and quite a bit of Greenburgh is all contributory to the Bronx River, just on the other side of the train tracks over here. All in all, it's about an 850 acre drainage area. About 200 to 250 acres of that drainage area drains through infrastructure here at Four Corners, and another about 500 or so acres drains to the pond here on the golf course. Ultimately, all of that flow is routed, and we'll show you in a sec, to infrastructure that runs behind these buildings on the west side of East Hartsdale Avenue. So it's not an insignificant amount of flow, and as you know, as most people who have seen the area know, there's not an existing kind of well-defined water course to convey it. Which hasn't always been the case. So again, in the vein of kind of stepping back and kind of seeing how we got here, we took a look at some kind of historical aerials and historical topographic maps prepared by the USGS, aerials from Westchester County around the turn of last century. You could see here there was kind of a well-defined stream that did run along East Hartsdale and Central Avenue to a degree. You can kind of see it here in the aerial as well. By the middle of the 1900s, you kind of start to see that legs of that stream disappear. You start to see the first buildings start to pop up here on East Hartsdale Avenue. The stream was still an open channel at that point. You can kind of still see the remnants of that open channel in the rear yards of these three buildings here. And then by the 60s or 70s, both from an aerial standpoint and from the USGS standpoint, you can kind of see that stream kind of disappear from the map. And that's combined with significant development that has happened along East Hartsdale Avenue. And like we'll talk about in a minute, pretty extensive culverting and burying of that stream in pipes, which are quite frankly just substandard. So this is how water flows through Four Corners. Again, about that 250 acres of drainage area comes to a series of pipes and culverts here in Central Avenue. You'll probably hear me reference the Fountain Diner and Starbucks quite a bit, mostly the Fountain Diner, because that's kind of where the brunt of the impact happens at Four Corners when there are heavy rainfall events and even moderate from a stormwater standpoint rainfall events. So about 250 acres is passed through these pipes, goes into these kind of poorly defined, for lack of a better word, channels on the golf course property. Another about, like I said, 500 acres drains to this golf course pond, another low flow channel, and it all kind of converges here behind these buildings. And there's a series of culverts that run underneath these parking lots and actually underneath the buildings. It outlets again into an open channel, like we talked about, from those buildings built in around the 40s or 30s. And then again, back into these twin 48-inch culverts, and then into a box culvert before it ultimately discharges underneath the train tracks to the other side of the Bronx River. So these 48-inch culverts really serve as the pinch point in the system, the kind of bottleneck in the whole system, and is what causes the majority of the backup that happens. So water is trying to get through these 48-inch culverts. It can't make it, so it kind of backs up and floods out the golf course. Same deal in this open channel here. It'll try and get into that 48-inch culvert and similarly will back up and start to inundate areas of these buildings. And I've got some maps in a second that I'll show you that kind of visually depict what I think many people have experienced over the years in terms of flooding inundation. The capacity of those 48-inch culverts is about 130 CFS. I know, not a very intuitive metric, but just to provide some kind of relative scope to that, for a 2-year storm, with the amount of flow that a 2-year storm, those pipes have about the capacity to pass about a quarter of it, right? And then once you start getting into those 100-year events, the flow very much dwarfs the available capacity in that system. So, just in short, the takeaway here is this is our real kind of problem area and what we kind of seek to address. So as part of our existing conditions analysis, I've stated from this top that Hartsdale Brook is not considered a kind of a FEMA officially mapped floodplain in the way that other kind of water courses in the region are, like the Bronx River or the Sprain or what have you. But we did complete an effort to understand, under the different storm events, where are we starting to see inundation, where are we starting to see backup, what is driving these impacts. And in addition, what we've tried to also do is kind of calibrate this analysis with input from the communities, property owners in these areas, and what we're seeing in our model in terms of, and I'll see if I can zoom in, back up behind these buildings on East Hartsdale, back up in the rears of these other East Hartsdale buildings is very much consistent with kind of the lived experience, for lack of a better word, of these property owners. So to that end, we recognize that there's a need to address conveyance. If we go back to that kind of pinch point analogy, we're at a very small amount of capacity given the flow that we're experiencing. To solve that 100-year event, to solve that ultimate storm that is on the kind of the scope of Ida, is quite an undertaking, and I'll show you some slides on what that looks like in a minute. In the interim, there are opportunities that can really provide relief for this 2-year storm event. That 2-year storm event, again, is about 3.5 inches in a 24-hour period. Just for some kind of relative perspective of what that is, I mean, in many years, 3.5 inches would be the most amount of rainfall that fell in a 24-hour period for the year. In other years, it's dwarfed by larger storms, much like in 2021 or 2007. But the aim here is that we are providing options that can provide some amount of relief for those 2 years events, so that these kind of frequent instances of inundation can be lessened, their frequency can be lessened, while acknowledging that those solutions do not eliminate vulnerability to larger events. And the only way to get there is kind of with a much bigger fix. So kind of looking at this kind of in stages, if you will. So Central Avenue. Again, I said I'd mentioned Four Corners quite a bit. We've got Four Corners, Fountain Diner, about Starbucks, and the furniture store. Again, the 2-year flow of that 200 or so acres is about 200 CFS. The existing capacity of the system is about half that. And the other challenge that we're dealing with here is a topographical challenge. So from an elevation standpoint, this elevation is at about 176. The water level in the golf course pond is around 176. The water level down by the parking garage on the kind of eastern side of East Hartsdale is around 176. So there's very little kind of topography to kind of bridge the water course from point A to point B. So again, we took a look at existing conditions, kind of looked at it against what we've seen out in the field historically in terms of backup. This is a photo here at this head wall behind Starbucks. And here's an excerpt from the computer model that we ran with a software called StormCAD, which is a computer-aided software that allows to kind of model the hydraulics within a pipe network. The simple takeaway is the blue is a representative of the water surface elevation that would be experienced. And as you can see, what our model is saying is very consistent with what we've seen experienced, which is under existing conditions, even if all of these pipes were totally cleaned out, which we know they're not, you would start to see backup here at the Fountain Diner, backup here at the entrance to Starbucks, and a significant amount of flow and backup coming out of here at the head wall, which ultimately discharges onto the golf course property. So the first solution to address that again, those from a stormwater standpoint, relatively small, but again, 3.5 inches in a 24-hour period is still quite an event. A series of box culverts in that similar alignment that could convey that stormwater and just kind of get it out of the Four Corners intersection. The pros to this is that it is, like I said earlier, an improvement that can be readily enacted to provide real-time relief for these frequent events. The con, like I've said, is, and this will be a common theme, is that even with this solution, those larger storm events still present levels of vulnerability.
What's the cost of that? Yes.
The order of magnitude, and again, we've done only very conceptual level designs for this, but the order of magnitude was in around the $4 or $5 million range, I believe.
For option one, this would be the temporary fix is $4 million.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying this 2-year relief effort that you said isn't really going to solve the problem. That's a $4 or $5 million budget item.
Correct. It's still, listen, it's still a considerable amount of work. You know, it's quite a bit of infrastructure, but we are also dealing with quite a bit of flow.
You define box culvert?
Box culvert is just a rectangular structure. It's essentially a pipe, but it's square or rectangular. It gives, like I had said earlier, there's very little elevation change between where the fountain diner sits and where the discharge point is on the golf course and where it ultimately connects into that East Hartsdale system. So the only way to kind of move that water is to go very low and fairly wide. There aren't really options for kind of big circular pipes because of the elevation constraints. So that's why you're seeing something that is essentially, it's a series of twin box culverts, which means kind of a double barrel system, only kind of 30 inches tall, almost, you know, about 10 foot wide. So again, because of the elevation constraints, the way to kind of attack this is to kind of go with something that's fairly low profile, but provides a fairly wide channel.
I know that the federal and state government is trying to address, you know, infrastructure and flooding issues. And I'm wondering, are you aware of, you know, federal or state grants that would help reduce the cost?
I'm looking at right here. The Department of Transportation has any number of grants, and this one in particular is the National Culvert Removal, Replacement, and Restoration Program to provide supplemental funding for grants to a state local government. So there are grants. This is not yet out there, but there are a couple of more too that have to do with road work, and
right.
So there are plenty on a federal level and certainly some in state.
So this is really something that's really manageable, because if we apply for a federal or state grant, you know, our contribution could be really affordable.
This is just an overview of grants. They don't have real detail in it as yet. It's just, this is what's coming.
For the town board, we're going to speak to grant opportunities in a bit. So we'll follow up with that after this this portion of the presentation.
So again, just you know, we ran this scenario through the modeling software. And ultimately what you start to see, again, that blue line representing that water surface elevation is kind of safe conveyance of that 2-year storm event. Obviously providing a benefit as compared to existing conditions for those larger year storm events. Part of the reason that we, and I'm just going to slide back a few slides, so I apologize. Part of the reason that we looked at that 2-year storm event as the baseline is in this 10-year storm, which is going to be on the right. The backup that happens here at Four Corners is more really a function of that pinch point. So the water is really, you know, there's very little you could do here just at Four Corners to kind of get the water out without doing extensive downstream improvements to this infrastructure behind the buildings. You could put, you know, 6 barrels of pipes in instead of 2. And the driving factor would be that backup of the flow from the pinch point here. So that's why the 2 years,
It seems to me that we have to address the garbage and debris that's collected in these culverts as well. We can't just say
Yes.
that, garbage and debris irrespective, the pipes are too small. So have you been able to ascertain what degree the garbage and debris that is currently clogging these pipes exacerbates the damage?
yes. I mean, we know that we've done an extensive amount of kind of TV inspecting of these different lines in tandem with some of the Central Ave sidewalk work that has happened in the recent months. Has been able to observe blockages and debris. The analyses that we've completed are all kind of assuming that the pipes are clean and clear as a baseline, because that's a reasonable point to get to. And alongside Rich Fond from DPW and Garrett, we've all kind of had discussions about the best framework to enact maintenance of these lines to ensure that they are clean and clear, both from the property owner standpoint and from DOT. So we're aware of the blockages. We're aware of some corrective actions that have been taken over the course of the last several years. I know there's a concrete blockage down here at the parking authority. I know there's a pipe here that was, crossing Central Avenue that was pretty extensively clogged. So it's slowly being addressed. But I think, the framework for continued maintenance of those is just as important as any design solution.
But is it fair to say that one should begin by cleaning everything out?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, this solution, again, would provide for that.
If I can comment, I think that's being done as we found the pipe on Central Avenue that you pointed to that was almost entirely blocked with debris.
Right.
We are taking corrective action, and as you mentioned that, they're putting the scope down, the camera down to take a look at that. But it's you could clean it out today and it could be clogged tomorrow.
Right.
But because it's all coming down from Ridge Road, the park, it's all coming downhill, and whatever is on the ground, we could say it's, debris and garbage and soda cans, but it's just, a lot of it's just gravel and rocks.
Yeah.
So there's no way to prevent that from occurring.
Well, I don't know if no way, but one of the advantages of the culvert is it gives you an area where you can clean out.
Yeah.
But what we found is that not only did the culvert have to be cleaned out, but the pipe also had to be cleaned out that was leading to it, because there was so much. But it's going to take a considerable effort, which I think is being taken to identify and fix this. But it looks to me, based on your drawings, where you have twin culverts behind the buildings on East Hartsdale Avenue, two 48-inch twin culverts going into a 48-inch pipe. And of course, you label that low flow as opposed to the high flow for the two twin culverts. Isn't that something we would have to address in order to get some kind of a satisfactory result?
So you're referring to these. I had not meant to imply that these twin culverts were high flow. They're by no means large enough to kind of keep up with the amount of flow they're receiving. And again, these numbers here are based on cleaned pipes, right? That's kind of our baseline, despite the fact that we acknowledge that that's not where we are today. We acknowledge that it's a relatively reasonable place to get to with some hard work, quite frankly, to clean these pipes out. But to that point, the implication was not meant to be that those twin 48s are high flow. It was more just to distinguish between what is open channel and what is piped.
Okay.
under existing
Uh,
condition.
I did see a legend somewhere where the blue was low flow and the red was high flow on one of the slides, but I understand what you're saying now. It's not actually a pipe, it's the open channel.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to, so again, just to put a bow on the first proposal, again, a solution that would seek to alleviate what is fairly frequent ponding here on Central Avenue, and as indicated by the photos that we have here, and I think the what most folks have experienced here on Central Avenue during moderate, quite frankly, rainfall events. So again, there are two distinct areas that have issues. One is Central Avenue and the other is East Hartsdale. They are very much connected, but we've kind of viewed them as kind of solutions to provide relief during that 2-year storm for each of those different cells that could quite frankly be enacted independent of each other, but could also be enacted together to provide kind of a greater comprehensive relief for the 2-year. So again, about 500 acres drains to this lake here, or Hartsdale Lake. It's really just a kind of a pond here on the golf course property. It's got an existing outlet structure here that kind of meters or controls the amount of flow that can leave the pond. It's got a valve so that it can be adjusted, and we understand that the golf course does take proactive steps to kind of drain the pond down in advance of storm events to provide some storage. Again, all of that flow converges here at these twin 48-inch culverts and low flow channels that run behind and under the East Hartsdale buildings. So the proposal here would be to use that pond for some amount of flood storage. The pond, quite frankly, for like 100-year storm, just does not have the square footage or volume to provide real appreciable benefits in these large storm events, like the 100-year storm. It's about 5 acres compared to the 500 acres it collects. That kind of ratio is just not there to provide meaningful detention or retention for the 100-year event. With that said, there are mechanisms that can be, or processes or improvements that can be put in place that can help provide relief again for that 2-year event that is that more frequent storm that does provide impact and kind of damage and to the residences on East Hartsdale Avenue. So that
And
would
what's the
involve
cost of that?
that's going to be highly variable. It could be as low as a few million, and it could be as north of 10 million. That will really depend on what the disposal cost and the disposal approach is for material dredged from the lake. That is the number one driver in this approach. So the approach would be remove about 4 feet of material from that lake to provide additional flood storage. Again, if the material is got contamination or what have you, those disposal costs kind of skyrocket, quite frankly. Whereas if it's fairly benign, it can be done for much lower costs. So that's something that as we refine this design, we're going to need to do some real field investigations to sanity check. But right now we've got a fairly large range, just absent any of that kind of key driver. So this approach that would provide about 4 foot of flood storage would reduce the peak flow at that East Hartsdale pinch point system by over half, provide over a 50% reduction in the peak flow. Again, that still puts us in a position where the flow to that system exceeds the capacity of that pinch point. That pinch point's capacity is only about 130, whereas even with this relief measure, we're still exceeding that quite a bit, but it will, and if I brought this slide back up just to kind of show what we are seeing in the model is, close to 18-inch to 2-foot reductions in inundations here. So while these pipes under existing conditions could remain surcharged, the extent to which they cause flooding and inundation in that 2-year event in specifically kind of this area of East Hartsdale residences, is appreciable.
So like, if we did say this option during the hurricane, I guess Iris, there were a lot of apartments that a lot of cars were lost and some restaurants went out. Would this effort have significantly reduced that from happening with the storm that we just had, last year?
Probably not, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Just to be frank with you, probably not, right? And that's part of the Ida is a 100-year storm, right? I think I know the term that I've heard it said quite a bit that we get a 100-year storm every year now, and that's a little bit of hyperbole from a stormwater standpoint. Ida was the real deal, for lack of a better word. It was 8 to 9 inches of rainfall. Beyond that, it was we, from a stormwater standpoint, look at amount of rainfall in a 24-hour period. Ida was an anomaly in that it dropped in an extreme amount of rainfall in a very short period of time. So these,
I believe we got 3 inches in an hour.
right? Yes, and I know that Garrett had at one point.
I think we have to be honest with the public.
Yes.
There's no storm system that can handle that kind of a deluge of water in such a short period of time. Stretch that out over 24 hours, which we didn't have the luxury of having because it all came in the peak was 3 inches. There was more before and after it. But according to the data that we've seen, it was 3 inches in 1 hour. And nothing that we're talking about here, even for the 100-year storm, because I believe that ran to a category of 700-year storm. Matter of fact, there wasn't even a chart that could handle that number from what I've seen.
Yes.
But it's predicted to be about a 700-year storm, even though you had to extrapolate because they never anticipated having 3 inches in an hour.
Correct. And yes, I know that the town had procured some data from a third-party vendor, who had said that that rainfall that board member Sheehan just referenced, could be on the 1 in 1,000 event, right? I mean, I don't think to your point, they don't even have, it's so off the charts that it doesn't even have a classification. So yeah, I agree with the board that a realistic understanding of how these measures can provide relief is prudent. These first two we've walked through are to relieve kind of that annual or maybe every couple of years ponding and inundation that happens in these areas of both Four Corners and the East Hartsdale system. At that point, even with these enacted, storms like Ida, which are those, I don't want to go as far to say once in a lifetime events because that's not the case, but those storms like Ida require a much more robust a much more robust solution, which we'll get into now.
Yeah, I just have
Um,
one other question about, the East Hartsdale Avenue, option for the 2-year, storm that you've been talking about, and, the $10 million, say it's a $10 million fix. Right now, for those type of storms, do some of the businesses temporarily go out of business because of the flooding? Or, are you talking about, significant damage that has caused closures of business and property damages, loss of cars, etc.?
I think that's something we still need to calibrate a little bit better. Quite frankly, I know that we do have instances of backup and, impacts to the flooding of that area. The extent to which those impacts drive property damage is something that we're in the process of working through. I know Garrett is diligent at kind of collecting certain receipts. Receipts is a broad term, but kind of data and the historical information regarding what events drove certain damages, because as we gear up to seek grant funding for these improvements, that is a key driver. Basically, the grant committees, for lack of a better word, will compare the cost of damages to the cost of improvements, and if they're at that right ratio, determine that grant money is appropriate. So we've been working and we'll continue to work to refine the estimates associated with the improvements. There's an effort ongoing now to kind of inventory the damage associated with different events, and kind of quantify X dollars per X inches of rainfall, Y dollars per Y inches of rainfall. So in process.
On this particular slide, I had mentioned, why isn't there a 25-year scenario? And not tonight, but in prior discussions, because most municipalities have been building their stormwater systems to a 25-year storm. And I just wanted to let the public know the reason why you didn't do a 25-year study is that increment doesn't really get you anything more. You either do 10 or you do 50. The 25 does not really address much more. Is that
Yeah, that is a fair statement. It's the fixes to address a 10 or 25-year storm, and from municipality to municipality will vary by which of those events infrastructure conveyance systems are designed to. The state recommends 10. Several municipalities will go one step beyond and bump it up to the 25. But you're exactly right. As we'll walk into what the 100-year solution looks like, and I'll also at the end flash up a couple of alternatives that were kind of left on the cutting room floor, for lack of a better word. You'll notice that the undertaking to fix that 100-year storm, let me say it said another way, the undertaking to fix a 10 or 25-year storm event puts you in you might as well fix the 100-year event range, in our opinion. So with that, just to put a bow on the 2-year pond dredging solution, again, the cons very much similar to Central Avenue. Quick implementation and real results soon, that don't rely on extensive downstream improvements. This is a regulated water course, so there will be a permitting hurdle to kind of cross in that. And like I said before, it doesn't fix the problem in East Hartsdale, it just lessens the load on it. So the 100-year,
we really have to find out, when you say lessen, I'd like to really see the extent of the property damage from 2-year storm. Because if there's not, if it's really addressing some puddles, something that's not that significant, is not worth spending $10 million on it.
Understood. Yeah. And again, and refining what that number is, right? Is that number 10 or is it 2 or 3? It's again,
Right.
it's just going to be so driven by what it takes to add more storage to this pond, which is again driven by some field data that still just needs to be collected. So the 100-year storm, again, it involves a similar approach to installing box culverts here on Central Avenue, just bigger and a little deeper. That elevation constraint that exists under existing conditions can be kind of finessed once you do a more comprehensive solution. So where I was saying you go very wide and shallow, if you are combining Central Ave improvements with downstream improvements, there are opportunities to go much deeper and get much more capacity. So it's a similar solution to that 2-year solution. It's just about twice as tall and twice as wide. A series of channels that would work through the golf course property here alongside the between the golf course and the buildings. And I'll walk through each one of these legs in a second, and then culverts again through East Hartsdale. The price tag in this, because I know the question's coming, is high, right? It's in the $40 to $50 million range. It is quite an undertaking from an infrastructure standpoint. That is just quite frankly commensurate with the problem that persists during those 100-year storms.
And I guess when people earlier, when we were talking about possibly 450 units of housing, and I was sort of a little, I thought it was too much. Perhaps the only way we could really get to this 100-year storm mitigation, if it's a partnership with the developers, the federal and state government. So if we really want to solve the problem, we probably have to go with a 100-year storm, mitigation, and we have to get developers to help, foot the costs of the mitigation.
Yeah, it will definitely need to be a kind of a shared pool of funding.
It's interesting, after the storm, not this storm, the last storm, one of the landlords on East Hartsdale Avenue wanted to build up and said that he wanted to have more air rights and tear down some of the buildings on East Hartsdale Avenue, and have some mixed use. And maybe that's a concept that has to be also discussed, because again, I just sort of feel that the cost is so much that we just need private investment.
I don't see this happening at all without significant federal money. This is so massive to ask a developer to not only do the traffic improvements. We were talking about saying that, they would have to pick up putting a pocket lane. This is just so massive, but the 100-year storm is what we actually need to be able to do.
Right.
Because everything else is not going to solve what has become the routine flooding, right? No one's ever going to be able to build for 3 inches in an hour. No system will ever be able to handle that. But the 100-year storm, particularly for this area, is something that we need to find a way to find the money to do this. And they may be able to address some of the issues at the corners, but we also, the golf course, the golf course has it's going to affect the golf course. There's no doubt, even though they drew the dredging, so it didn't seem like it affected any of the tees. But we're going to have to be a partnership with the golf course as well, and as well as the owners of the properties on East Hartsdale Avenue, because the pipe is on their property. In some cases, the pipe is underneath their buildings. It's not their fault. Somebody built the building over the pipe, but it's the reality, and we have to address it.
Very well said. So I know we're running
Sorry,
long, so
Sorry, what was that?
I said very well said.
Oh, okay. You fell
I'm-
for it.
I know we're running long, so I will kind of get through this, but again, similar proposal, large box culverts in Central Avenue, followed by an open channel. We're modeling this very much as a kind of a trapezoidal system. I think there, through a refined design approach, are ways to kind of dress this up, make it, potentially a little bit more ecologically friendly, and maybe a bit more of a the extent it can be an amenity, but again, just from a strictly hydraulic standpoint, we're looking at channels on the more order of 40 to 80 feet wide at its top. Again, running alongside this western edge of, the eastern edge of the golf course, excuse me. And then similarly, a series of very large box culverts that would run in this section of East Hartsdale Avenue. The biggest challenge there is just going to be all of the existing utilities that are in the street, that would have to get accommodated around this. Again, not a small undertaking, but to board member Sheehan's point, not a small problem to address either. I'd mentioned a couple of alternatives that were kind of left on the cutting room floor. We had looked at another alternate that would have kind of rerouted that water course through what is now the golf course pond to another set of culverts in a very similar scenario. From just a practicality standpoint, this would kind of blow up the central feature of that golf course, and it's probably not all that feasible just from a practical partnership standpoint, but we did look at other ways to kind of get that water from point A to point B. And then we looked at a 10-year solution. Again, this is a scenario where maybe this isn't an open channel, and you could potentially, the real benefit of this solution is that you could potentially avoid some of that extensive utility kind of disruption to East Hartsdale here, and you could potentially kind of squeeze it back here, or maybe in kind of built into the kind of the program of a mixed use or redevelopment of these parcels here. But in any case, this is kind of where a couple of shows that once you start ripping into this slope and cutting through the golf course and doing Central Ave, and all to just still be vulnerable to a 100-year event, is where we kind of landed on the 2 to the 100-year storm, while a major gap solving anything bigger than the 2-year storm it becomes such an expense that it really becomes prudent to just kind of look up a level. And then just at a very high level in the near term, what Garrett and I did hear from several property owners during IDA. So we got some good news and we got some bad news, actually. The good news was the folks that implemented flood doors, and I believe they're the property right here, Garrett, correct me if I'm wrong, but folks that implemented flood doors in the rear of their property saw real success from those flood doors in keeping that water out from breaching the ground floor. So that's an example of a strategy that could be implemented or repeated elsewhere for property owners that are experiencing similar issues. The other thing we heard was that some of the flooding, especially in cellar spaces during IDA, was actually driven by backup, whether it be from kind of floor drains, or I'm not sure if it was from also toilets, but at the very least floor drains. So installing backflow valves on those drains, those connections to the storm sewers, or if it's sanitary, are another kind of low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better word, that could be implemented to kind of address some of these property damage issues that we're seeing now in the interim of one or any of these kind of larger scale solutions that are going to take time for design and funding and construction to be implemented. So that's the conclusion of our presentation. Again, the big takeaway here is the 100-year storm solution is by no means a simple fix. There are things that can be done in the near term to provide relief. To Supervisor Finer's point, quantifying that damage associated with the 2-year event will be critical in understanding the real merit of those solutions. But both from an existing conditions inventorying standpoint and starting to devise, real solutions to move forward, I think we're at a good point right now to start pursuing grants.
In terms of, I'm not sure if this would be a question for you, but if there's underground water, and we're looking at redeveloping the four corners, how would that, how we have to resolve the underground water, so that the foundations of the buildings could be built, right?
Yeah, and I think redevelopment on itself will aid in that fact. Newer developments and many municipalities, White Plains, we represent Portchester, so on behalf of Portchester, require that new developments don't discharge groundwater to the storm sewers. So if you do have a subsurface cellar or a subsurface parking garage, that those structures are built watertight to kind of resist any groundwater and keep it out and keep it away from the storm sewer. Older developments will often have some pumps and connections and things like that will actually add a load to the storm sewer if groundwater is being discharged there. So it will have to definitely be vetted out during the site design of any development at Four Corners, but the development on itself, regardless, should provide some sort of hopefully at least a reduction in the amount of groundwater that might be contributing to the
And the
sewers.
area also gets, we get flooding on the Bronx River.
Yep.
And if we address flooding, say, on East Hartsdale Avenue near the golf course, would that have, while we're doing that work, will there be any impacts to the Bronx River?
So the way,
Mitigating, flooding on one and creating a bigger problem on the Bronx River. I'm just wondering.
Yep. So no, it's a really good point. It's something that we've looked into and previous engineers who have looked at this issue have also looked into. The way the simplest I could put it is, by the time, if you think of it almost like an avalanche or a tidal wave, by the time the water from Four Corners gets to Bronx River, in any of these scenarios, it's well in front of that kind of tidal wave or that avalanche of water that's coming down. The peaks basically happen at different periods. So there's not an expectation that any of these 100-year solutions would exacerbate flooding conditions in the Bronx River. That river is dealing with a much larger drainage area. If we had lined the peak up, whereas we're sending our water to the Bronx River as the highest of high flows are flowing through the Bronx River, that's another situation. And to the 3 inches of rainfall in an hour situation, there may be merit to that question in terms of that scenario, but in the strictly the kind of 100-year storm, about 9 inches in 24 hours, the way the peaks line up, the way the peak discharges, the timing lines up, we don't expect to exacerbate that 100-year floodplain for the Bronx River.
Also has a golf course, been, contacted relating
Yes.
to, say, dredging, and
Yes.
are they receptive?
Yes, I can speak to that, Supervisor. I will say the golf course has been extremely cooperative, given us a lot of historical information And regarding the dredging, in fact, they've indicated that they would welcome a partnership with the town with design and construction funding grants. So the golf course has been very receptive. We did present some of the alternate options for the 100-year storm. And as you would expect, and I think as Justin alluded to, the golf course had major concerns with a significant channel that would cut through the center of its course and majorly impact golf holes and golf different areas of the golf course. But they were even receptive towards a 100-year option that stayed on the periphery. Now, which is difficult because I have gotten a few emails here, and yes, indeed, when Justin had that aerial for the 100-year storm option, what you see is rows of stands of trees, and that would have to be significantly interrupted. So that is certainly not a benefit of hugging the north side of the golf course, but at the same time you have to be respectful of their operation. So I think when Justin indicated working in the ecological perspective, massive replanting would be a part of any type of 100-year solution that really hugs the north part of the golf course. But just to answer your question, the golf course has been extremely helpful and accommodating to all of this planning, and there certainly have to be a partner, and I'm glad that they're a partner so far.
We have two other agenda items, I think, so we
Right.
don't have to make a decision today. We could do it even next week, right?
Right, but we did say that if somebody sent in their comments, I know the supervisor was reading some of them, but Garrett, are there any major comments that you see?
I think there's a lot of good comments. Some have been answered as the presentation unfolded, but what I'd like to do is I think collect them, and we can provide responses. I'll make sure that we write back to every individual that sent in a question, and we'll provide them with a response.
Great. Terrific. This was really very, very informative and, very interesting.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good.
you.